This is a ghost story, it's a true story. It was told to me first when I was a little boy, and I heard it from my grandfather. My grandfather was a man called William Fell, and he was a coal miner. And in those days, there were a lot of coal mines in West Cumbria, or Cumberland as it used to be, but now they're all closed and all the traces of them are gone, really. All the slag heaps are grown over. All the winding heads of the great towers that sent the lifts down are all gone. So this dates from the late 1950s, early 60s, and when he was working at a place called Siddick. You may know that miners, coal miners, probably all miners, are very superstitious people. And I suppose that is to do with the fact that there are so many ways that you can die down a coal mine. You can be suffocated as the air is taken from you by the gas known as choke damp. Or there's a combustible gas known as fire damp, which can kill you by fire. And these coal mines, they run many miles out, up to 3 miles out under the sea. And the miners dug down there to follow the seams of coal, which are very faulted because the geology is quite difficult there. So they would follow them. So the third way would be when the sea broke in, and there were numerous disasters where the sea came in and drowned the miners who were working there. And there are monuments to them in Whitehaven and Lauca and places like that. So air, fire, water, and of course, earth, because they could simply collapse on you and crush you to death. Or worse still, they could stop your exit with tons and tons of rock, so that even if you survived, there was no way you were ever going to get out. So I guess this all contributed towards coal miners, and all miners, as I said, being very superstitious men. For example, I remember there was the superstition that in the tin bath that they had in front of the fire, the small of the back must remain unwashed, because there was the superstition that if you wash the small of the back, then they won't be able to support the strength of the rock if it caves in on them. I don't know if that actually makes a lot of sense, but that was the superstition. Now, in this particular mine at Siddick, there was a place deep down called the Ladies' Gallery. One of the miners who used to work with my granddad, William Fell, was John Bragg. Now, John Bragg was particularly superstitious, and he had a sweetheart that he'd been engaged to be married to, called Dorothy, but she died of tuberculosis. But he, for some reason, always kept a piece of blue silk with him that had been hers, although they never actually got married. And he never looked at any other woman because he was so in love with this memory of his Dorothy. Well, you could consider that a superstition. But where it becomes a bit weird is that in this gallery known as the Ladies' Gallery, there was supposed to be a ghost. And it was kind of shunned by people. It wasn't on the main thoroughfare. So what used to happen was they would go down in the iron cages, down, I don't know how far down, but hundreds of feet down under the earth. And then they would have to walk up to 3 miles to get to the coalface, by which time this was under the sea, 3 miles under the sea. So the Ladies' Gallery was sidelined. It wasn't on the main thoroughfare down. It was a place for storage, and because it was quite quiet, not many people went there. And for some reason, it got the reputation of being haunted by the ghost of a lady, hence the name. So what was supposed to happen was that you would hear the rustling of silk, as in a lady's dress. And obviously there were no ladies in silk dresses down the coal mine, so this was held to be the ghost that haunted the Ladies' Gallery. So people kept away from it because, as I said, there were superstitious men. Now, the legend of the ghost would come and go, as these things do, and over time nothing much would happen, and then there would be an upsurge in sightings, or rather hearings, of the rustle of silk. So this happened one particular time, and John Bragg became really interested, and in his head, somehow, he connected this rustling of silk with the scrap of blue silk that he had from his Dorothy's dress, his fiancée, who he never married because she was sadly taken from him. So he became obsessed with this, and he always wanted to go to the Ladies' Gallery. Anyway, how I heard the story was my granddad said to me that John Bragg had been pestering him, wanting to go to the Ladies' Gallery. But of course there was no real reason, other than, I can't remember what they kept there, but there would be the odd reason to go and pick up some machinery, but mostly there was no reason to go there. So John Bragg always wanted to go there, but he obviously wasn't brave enough to go on his own, because he wanted my grandfather to go with him. And he would say to him, Bill, come to the gallery with me. Yeah, we can go when we finish the shift, and just if we stay half an hour, maybe I'll hear her. Maybe I'll hear Dorothy. Well, my granddad was a pretty practical man, and he'd known John Bragg since they were boys together. But he'd always thought him a bit fey. I think that was the thing they used to say in those days, a bit otherworldly. And he said, look, when I finish my shift at the pit, I do not want to linger down here. And anyway, the cages will have gone. and there won't be one going up till the next shift comes. So unless we can get a special dispensation, but I don't think that's very likely. So he said, no, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, he went home and he spoke to my grandmother, and he told her what John Bragg had been saying, and my grandmother, Lily, said to him that, that she agreed completely with him. He was very foolish. She was very practical woman, very a tough woman, really. And they had to be tough. They were poor. They lived in a harsh world, and they were tougher than we are. And so she thought all this was nonsense, and she said, Bill, don't you be going down that mine with him. As soon as you finish, you come back up, because you've been down in the dark long enough. Time went on. Although the sightings died down a little bit, somehow this time John Bragg couldn't get the obsession out of his head that somehow this rustling was connected with Dorothy. It so happened that one particular time, my uncle, Ronnie, was ill when he was just a boy, and they had to go to the doctors. And for some reason, I don't know why, my grandmother couldn't go. I think she worked in the factory. So my granddad had to take him to the doctors, and he had to get some time off to do this. It was nationalised by that time, but there were still some hangovers from the private mines days, and they weren't very, not like today, they weren't very forgiving. And if you worked, or you didn't get paid, and of course they couldn't afford not to get paid. He was talking about this at work, that he had to take Ronnie to the doctors, and John Bragg pipes up, I'll cover your shift for you. He wasn't supposed to be working that day. Don't you worry, Bill, I'll cover your shift for you. Anyway, my granddad was really pleased, because it meant that if they just swapped the things, they wouldn't lose out on the money. As I said, they didn't have much money at all. So anyway, that came and went. My uncle is fine. He's still alive today. He's 88. That meant that my granddad owed John Bragg a favour. I don't know how long it was. It wasn't very long. And John Bragg started this business about, let's go down the ladies' gallery. Just come with me, Bill. Come with me after. And my granddad had said, come on, I've done enough hours down here in the dark. I don't want to be lingering about here. We'll miss the cage up. And anyway, then John Bragg says to him, but Bill, you owe me a favour. You owe me a favour. Right. So my granddad kind of put it off, and he went back to his wife, Lily, and she said, you'd be a fool if you did that. And he says, no, Lily, but he's right, I owe him a favour. He helped us out when Ronnie was sick, and we would have lost out money. I'll only go for an hour or so. And she said, I don't think you should go at all. He said, but the thing is, a debt is a debt. I'll pay him back. If all he wants is an hour, then that's what we'll do, and I'll be back up. Of course, he's not going to see anything down there, because there's nothing down there. Just foolish people making things up. Maybe somebody heard something once, and the rest of them just carry on the rumour for the fun of it, It's only John Bragg that seemed to believe it might possibly be. Well, I say that. Some of the others might have done, because there was a superstitious dread of the place. But nobody believed it was Dorothy. How could it be Dorothy? How did Dorothy end up down a coal mine? She hadn't ever been down a coal mine, as far as I know. So, anyway, the time comes, and my granddad says to John Bragg, okay, well, you're right, I owe you a favour, so what we'll do is we'll go to the ladies' gallery after the shift today, we'll wait 1 hour, and then we'll leave. Anyway, John Bragg seemed overjoyed by this. He seemed to think as soon as he went there, he's going to hear Dorothy or see Dorothy, and in some way be reunited with her. So the shift went on, and after the shift, reluctantly, my granddad went with him. So they went to the ladies' gallery, and then my granddad says, so what now, John, what now? He said, well, we just wait. So they sat there, and they had the electric lamps on their heads and had a battery pack. In the battery, there was enough light for the shift, but a bit more, because you never knew what was going to happen. There would only be an hour, tops, left in the battery. So my granddad said, well, we'll wait, and as soon as the battery wanes, we'll go. So they went, and they sat down, and they sat in the cold ladies' gallery, and you could hear the dripping of the water somewhere out of sight. Now, the ladies' gallery was a long chamber, but there were side chambers off it, most of which were unused, and they led who knows where, because people had been mining down here at least since the 1700s, if not before, and in some cases the Romans had mined for coal. I don't know about the ladies' gallery, but there certainly were corridors and passages leading off, and these were quite dangerous because they weren't lit, they hadn't been drained, there may have been rock falls, so nobody went down them. They sat down. And I think my granddad, he told me that basically he was just hoping for a quiet hour, and then they'd go. So he sat there with the lamps getting dimmer and dimmer, and he's looking at his watch, and the time's going on. Of course, he didn't hear anything. Of course he didn't. Time went on. Quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and then I think my granddad had said to him, come on, John, let's stop this foolishness. Let's just leave now. We're not going to hear anything. And he said, no, Bill, let's just wait. I know she'll come. And my granddad was like, well, He didn't want to make fun of the man. He was obviously weak-minded or something. And he always had been, apparently. But they waited a bit longer. And then my granddad noticed the batteries were getting dim, and he said, listen, John, these batteries aren't going to last. They're not going to last very much longer. Let's go back. We'll get back onto the main, because there was a short walk before they got into the main shaft that led between the lift that came down and the coal face 3 miles away. So let's just go now. Anyway, John Bragg wouldn't have any of this. He said, let's just wait. You promised me an hour, and an hour we're going to stay. You owe me. What could my granddad say? So they waited half an hour, 35 minutes, with the lamps getting dimmer and dimmer. And there'd be nobody there because the shaft, there wasn't anybody due down. The workforce were 3 miles away. There would be some electricians and the odd people, but they were rare. There was no reason for people to be going back and forward. It wasn't, where they were was not a busy place. It was away from any of the main thoroughfares. And then, about 40 minutes in, there's a sound. Well, John Bragg picks up his ears. Did you hear that? And my granddad maybe had heard it, but he said, no, I didn't hear anything. Because, to be honest, he didn't want to hear anything. No, I didn't hear anything. No, there was a sound. There was a sound, Bill. There was a sound. From one of those corridors there, one of those passages into the earth. And my granddad's like, oh, come on, John, really, it wasn't anything. But he could feel himself getting a little bit rattled. So, he waited, and my granddad's fervently praying, nothing happens again. And then there's another sound, and this time, it's closer. And you can't deny what it was. Did you hear that? Did you hear that, Bill? Well, he couldn't deny what he'd heard. He said, I heard something, I don't know what it was. He said, it was a rustling of silk. My granddad says, well, don't be daft. What would silk be doing down here? It must have just been a flow of air or something. No. It was a rustling of silk, blue silk. And he got out from his wallet the scrap of blue silk that he always kept. And he said, look, this is what it was. This is a scrap from Dorothy's dress. That's Dorothy. She's come back for me, Bill. She's come back for me. Now imagine you're in a chamber deep underground, away from any company, apart from one man who you're beginning to think is insane. And it's dark, and there's the dripping sound of water. But in addition, there's a noise that sounds like the rustling of a woman's dress. And you can't explain that. So my granddad wanted to go. He gets up, he says, no, it's not time yet. Bill, you promised me an hour, it's not time. And she's here, she's coming, she's there. And then they hear it closer. And my granddad's saying, well, it sounded like she was just outside the glow of the lamp, which weren't bright. And they were directional. So they were where you looked. And when he looked, he could see the entrance. And you know what? She said, it looked like a shadow. It looked like there was something there. Now, how could that be? It couldn't be, of course, it couldn't be. And then there's a rustling of silk, just so gentle and faint. And John Bragg says, I'm going, and he gets up and he goes towards it. And my granddad shouts, John, stop, what are you doing, man? They're dangerous down there. And he says, no, Bill, it's Dorothy. She's there. She's come for me. My granddad, don't, what are you saying? Let's just go. Let's just go, we've had our time. Somebody's playing a trick on us. Somebody must be down here playing a trick on us. Did you tell somebody you were coming down? I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody, Bill. Just you and me know we're down here. No, come on. Somebody's pulling my leg out. You pulling my leg. This is just a setup, isn't it? You're just having a joke at my expense. But that wasn't true. And he knew it wasn't true. John Bragg got up and walked towards the entrance, rapturously, as if greeting his long-lost Dorothy. My granddad says, John, come back here now, or I'm going to leave. But John Bragg ran into the tunnel. And my granddad said it was as if somebody was in there waiting for him, and they both disappeared. Well, of course, he shouted after him. He shouted and he yelled after him. But he didn't come back. He heard him call him back, with the echoes of the tunnel, sounding like it was getting deeper and deeper into this tunnel. God knows where it led, just somewhere dark and deep and dangerous, somewhere lost and forgotten, somewhere where people hadn't been for years, decades, maybe even a century. God knows what was lurking down there. My granddad said, and he wasn't a coward, because nobody goes 3 miles into the sea, in the dark, and hews coal if they're a coward. But he said his courage failed him and he couldn't, and he wouldn't follow John down, wherever that rustling had taken him. Well, he waited. And of course he was looking at his watch, and the battery was failing, and he knew that if the battery went, it would be so dark he'd never find his way out. So he stood and he shouted, "John, John, let's be going. Come on, John. Come back, John." But there was no answer. And so he waited some more. And the battery faded. It wasn't a bright light now, it was a very dim light. And he waited, and he knew if he waited any longer, he was going to be stuck there. So he yelled one last time, "John Bragg, enough of your foolishness. Come back now. I'm leaving." But there was no reply. So, with great tribulation and conscience, but knowing that if he stayed down there, he might actually die down there. He might never find his way out. So with the last light of his fading battery of the bulb on his miner's headlamp, he turned and went, and what was in his mind was, he would go to the bottom, he would wait at the bottom of the shaft. There was a way of communicating. Even in the 60s they had radio, so there was a telephone or something, he said. It wouldn't be radio, it would probably be wired. So he would go there, and that was his plan, and he would call for help, and they'd go and look for the missing John Bragg and get him what kind of help he needed. First of all, they need to find him, then they need to bring him back, and then to get him some psychiatric treatment or something. And he felt bad that he'd indulged him in this, but, you know, the guy had played on this issue of "you owe me." So anyway, my granddad walked with the failing light of his helmet. And at the edge of the ladies' gallery, where the tunnel led in a twisty sort of way to the main thoroughfare and then back to the lift, he turned and he looked down in the direction that John Bragg had gone. And he yelled one last time. And do you know what he said? He said it was almost as if, standing there just at the edge of the light, was a shape. And he thought it might be John, but he knew it wasn't. Because it wasn't the shape of a man, he said. It was the shape of a woman. And in the light, he thought he saw her wearing a blue silk dress. Well, that was enough for him, and he turned, and he ran, and he ran, and he got back to the bottom of the shaft, waiting by the elevator. And he said he was panting, and he didn't know what to make of it. He was terrified. And he rang the telephone at the bottom, and he called up and said he was down. Well, of course, they wondered what he was doing, but they sent the elevator down for him. Now, it so happened that the safety inspector there was a guy called Jack Tubman. Now, Jack Tubman was nearing retirement, and he came down, and he was another guy with him who, I don't know the name of the other guy, but there were two of them anyway, and he came down, and he says, "What are you doing down here, Bill Fell? What are you doing down here?" And he told him the full story. He said, "Well, I'm here with John Bragg, and he wanted to stop in the ladies' gallery. Now, I owed him a favour, and he had this mad idea that the rustling of the silk, this so-called ghost, was his Dorothy." And Jack Tubman looked at him and said, "You must be crazy." And the other fellow said, "What, in the ladies' gallery?" "In the ladies' gallery. What on earth possessed you to go there?" And he said, "Well, what could I do?" Anyway, he says, "You, Bill Fell, you get up there now. We'll go and look for him. Your battery's nearly gone anyway. You get up there, you go home, go back to your wife. You got work to do in the morning, so come back in the morning." Anyway, so my granddad went home, and he had his bath, and he had his supper. And he told Lily what had happened, and she told him he was a fool. But she loved him anyway. He couldn't get to sleep. So the next day, he was on a back shift, and he wasn't due to start till 2 p.m. So in the morning, he was at home, and there was a knock on the door. And Lily opened the door, and she called back, "Bill, it's for you. It's Jack Tubman." Well, anyway, Jack Tubman had come. And he came in, and he said, "Listen, Bill, I want you to sit down." So they sat down in the parlour that my nana kept super clean just for visitors. And they sat down there, and he said, "I'm sorry, I've got some bad news." And he said, "Oh, aye, what?" "Have you found him?" "Aye, we found him." "And is he alive?" "No, he's not alive." And Bill knew what the answer would be before it was spoken. He says, No, I'm sorry, Bill. He's not alive." And my granddad said, "So what killed him? What was the cause of death?" He says, "Well, we don't know, to be honest. When we looked at it, there wasn't any obvious cause of death. There wasn't a mark on his body. Just his eyes, really." He said, "What do you mean, his eyes?" "Well, he was staring. Anyway, I shouldn't tell you this, it'll disturb you, but I'm not a lad. You owe it to me to tell me straight. Come on, Jack. We've known each other a long time. He says, well, he says his eyes looked like he'd been frightened to death. You know, he believed it was Dorothy, you know, his long-lost love that was down there. And Jack Tubman shook his head firmly, and he said, well, whatever it was down there that he met, he said, that thing's been down there ever since the first shaft was sunk. And whether it came down with us, or whether it was there waiting for us when we dug down, there's one thing that's certain. Whatever he met there down that dark, lonely tunnel, it wasn't Dorothy. So there we have it. Apparently it's a true story. The mine's shut now. Sealed off. Can't get down. Maybe that's just as well.